About 3 years ago, due to a job transfer, I had to move to another city. I rented a small apartment in a very quiet residential area. What I liked most about this place was its cleanliness and tranquility. Just a few days after settling in, while I was resting at home, a sudden foul stench filled the air. I followed the smell to find its source, and it turned out it was coming from outside. This neighborhood had always been clean and tidy. How could there be such a strange odor? Curious, I opened the front door. The moment the door swung open, the stench became even stronger. Right in front of my door stood a figure whose gender was unclear. That person was wearing filthy, tattered clothes. Their hair had almost completely fallen out, leaving only a few sparse strands. Their skin was mottled and rotting, covered in countless crawling insects that gnawed at their decaying flesh. The horrifying sight made me scream in terror. A monster! I quickly tried to shut the door, but the creature used its rotting hand to block it. It opened its mouth wide as if trying to barge into my house. I pushed against the door with all my strength, but its jaw kept stretching wider and wider, its lower jaw drooping all the way down to its chest. Frozen with fear, all I could do was scream. Then, suddenly, the creature vanished mysteriously. My neighbor, Kit, had heard the commotion and walked over. As he approached, he casually asked, "Did Tiu Feng come looking for you? You must be new here, so you probably don't know yet. Just throw it some candy and it'll leave you alone." Saying that, Kit pulled a piece of candy from his pocket and handed it to me. Then he turned and walked away, leaving me completely confused by his words. I silently stepped back inside my apartment. But after that terrifying encounter, the grotesque face, the overwhelming stench, the rotting flesh, the putrid breath, and the sickening crunching sound of bones, those haunting images clung to my mind. What on earth was that thing? Was it real? Or was it just a scene from a horror movie being filmed nearby? I kept thinking about it until I unknowingly drifted off to sleep. When I opened my eyes again, it was already the next morning. I hurriedly got ready and drove to work. But before I could leave the neighborhood, bang! A loud noise erupted. It seemed like I had just hit something. Panicked, I quickly stopped the car and got out to check. It was that monster again. It lay sprawled right in front of my car. Yet there wasn't a single scratch on its body. It was perfectly intact. It twisted its grotesque form and stared at me with its horrifying eyes, sending a chill down my spine. Slowly, it staggered to its feet, cracking and resetting its bones into place. Then it raised its arms, opened its mouth wide, and lunged at me. Its hands were covered in sticky bits of sugar, with ants crawling all over its rotting teeth. I screamed and stumbled backward in fear. Just then, Steve appeared again, tossing a handful of candy at the creature. The monster immediately dove to the ground, frantically stuffing the candy into its mouth. But even after finishing, it still wasn't satisfied. It turned and rushed toward Steve's house. Luckily, Steve managed to run inside just in time and slam the door shut. The monster could only stand outside, howling in frustration. Suddenly, I felt dizzy. My vision blurred, and then darkness. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in Steve's house. Startled, I sat up and tried to get out of bed, but a sharp pain shot through my head. My legs went weak, and I collapsed back onto the mattress. Confused, I asked Steve what had happened and why I had passed out. With a sigh, Steve explained, "It's all because of that monster. If you get too close to it for too long, your body's cells will get poisoned. In severe cases, the cells could start to rot. You've probably noticed, any living thing that gets near it starts to wither away. Not just people, but plants, animals, even the oxygen in the air gets affected. There have been many mysterious deaths in this neighborhood. About 20% of them have no known cause. From that day on, every time I saw that monster, I would throw candy at it. But I wanted to understand more about this creature and learn how to protect myself. So, I decided to visit Steve and ask him for more details. At first, he refused, saying he didn't want to talk about it. But after I kept begging him, he finally agreed. He told me that the first victim was a young man, tall, strong, and healthy. Back then, Sarah wasn't a monster. She was actually very beautiful. The young man had a crush on her and pursued her. One day, during a date, he kissed her cheek. Not even a few hours later, he started vomiting blood and died. During his autopsy, they found hundreds of insects crawling inside his body. All his internal organs had been eaten away, but the police couldn't determine the cause or find any suspect. Shocked, I blurted out, "How is that even possible?" I was desperate to know what had happened to the next victim. Steve fell silent for a moment before pouring himself a cup of coffee. I could see his hands trembling. "The next victim," he continued, "was a woman named Julia. One day, she was found swallowed whole by a giant python. The police couldn't find any evidence or leads. To this day, the case remains unsolved. But everyone in the neighborhood already knew it was Sarah, that monster. Every time Sari appeared, Julia would scream at her, telling her to leave and never come near her. Hearing this, I started trembling uncontrollably. I couldn't listen anymore, but Steve just sighed and said, "Even so, this neighborhood is still a good place to live." Then he reached out and handed me some candy. I took the candy and left. For a few months, everything remained peaceful. Then one day, I saw Sar again, that wretched monster. I was just about to leave my house when I saw it standing right at my doorstep. Instinctively, I reached into my pocket for candy, but there was none. That's when I realized I hadn't seen the creature for so long that I had forgotten to restock my supply. I thought to myself, I just need to run. But before I could get far, it flicked out its tongue, long and thick like a giant python, and wrapped it around me, pulling me back. I barely managed to break free, but soon after, red rashes began appearing on my skin. Pain spread through my entire body. Unable to bear it, I rushed to the hospital. The doctor said my skin was infected with a toxin and asked me what had happened. At that moment, all I could think about was revenge. I prepared a fake candy. Inside, I hid a small rock. The next time I saw the monster, I threw the fake candy at it. It eagerly devoured it. Seconds later, it let out an agonizing scream. Then, its body suddenly began to dissolve into the ground. I was overjoyed. The entire neighborhood was so relieved that they even threw a massive celebration. I truly believed I had destroyed the monster for good. But not long after, while strolling through the park one Sunday, I suddenly spotted a large, frog-like creature chewing on something pink, something that looked just like the snowflake candies. And then I realized it was the monster. I screamed and turned to run, but it had already noticed me. It spewed a thick, slimy green toxin in my direction, and my body went completely numb. Luckily, at that moment, I managed to find Steve, along with a group of people who were standing nearby. They were preparing a green candy, which was placed inside a cart resembling a cannon carriage. Everyone worked together to launch the candy toward the monster. Naturally, the creature, thinking it was real candy, opened its mouth wide to catch it and began chewing greedily. But to everyone's surprise, in less than 30 seconds, the monster suddenly let out a piercing scream. Its entire body began to melt into the ground and vanished completely. The crowd erupted in cheers, celebrating the defeat of the monster. However, I quickly returned to my room, packed my belongings, and decided to move elsewhere. Because I knew, one day, the monster would return.